let's spend the next few minutes taking a look at Photoshop's preferences. So if you're on the Windows side, head to your Edit menu. If you're on the Mac, as I am, head to your Photoshop menu, and then look for Preferences, and then choose General. Or what you can do is, on the Windows side there, you can hit Control-K, or here on the Mac, we could hit Command-K if you want. And that'll bring you into Photoshop's General Preferences dialog box, this dialog box here. Now, what I'm not going to do, and I hope you're not disappointed here, is what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to go through every single option in excruciating, nauseating detail. What I will do is I'll perhaps point out some highlights, and maybe what will wind up happening is as we work along through the series together, we might come back into the preferences and we might adjust a few things. But I just kind of want to give you a general idea of how the preferences are arranged here inside Photoshop. And this is a fresh installation of Photoshop CS5 that I'm working with, so hopefully everything should be pretty much standard here. Okay, so I'm inside the Preferences dialog box. You can see running down the left-hand side, we have all of our different categories. So we're inside General, of course. We have Interface and File Handling and Performance and so on. We'll take a quick look at each of these categories, and I'll point out a few things inside each category. So, starting off inside General, the color picker. When we start working with color inside Photoshop, the default is to use the Adobe color picker, which I would highly recommend you stick with. I can also, here on the Mac, choose the Apple color picker, or I'm sure on the Windows side you could use the Windows color picker, but just make sure you're set to Adobe there. It's much more flexible. And then below that, we have some additional options here. We have resize image during paste or place, for example, or use the Shift key for tools, which you saw that earlier when I was giving you the tour of the toolbox there. We held down the Shift key and we clicked on our tools to flip through our tools. We have animated zoom. We have the zoom resizes windows. We haven't talked about zooming yet, but these are just some different zoom options that we have. Now, I think what I'll do here is I'm going to leave all the defaults here. We also have another very important option, our image interpolation, and I think this already came up once for us, interpolation or resampling, and I certainly don't want to go off the deep end with you here right off the bat early on in our time here together, but this is going to play a key role when we start resizing our images. So remember where this guy is. This one's kind of important. Okay, let's take a look at the interface screen here. I could either click on interface here on the left-hand side, by the way, or I could simply click on the next button way over here on the right-hand side, and that just simply takes me down to the next screen, which is kind of cool. So here inside the interface screen, we can obviously set our interface options, our standard screen mode, which is gray, our full screen mode with menus, which is gray, full screen, which is black. We haven't talked about our different screen views just yet, but we'll get to those. We can, if we want to, have colors, highlighted colors inside our menus if we want. We have tooltips, again, when we're hovering over top of items inside our preferences, we can have a tooltip show up just like this, or when we're hovering over top of tools inside the toolbox, for instance. And here's another option as well. When we start working with multiple images, multiple files, the default is to open those documents as tabs. And again, you'll see how this plays out, but you might want to keep this guy kind of in mind as we start working with multiple files. Okay, good stuff. Let's head down to the next category. Once again, you can click on Next there on the right, or just click on File Handling there on the left. Photoshop always wants to save image previews whenever we're saving our files. It always wants to append the file extension. So if I'm saving out a JPEG, for example, and I haven't put .jpg on the end, well, Photoshop's going to do that for me, right? And it always wants to save as into the original files folder as well. Okay, wonderful. Let's go down to Performance. Now here what I can do is I can set the amount of memory that Photoshop is using. So right now this could be a default, I'm not 100% sure, but the available RAM that I have, at least on this computer, is 2600 megabytes of RAM, and Photoshop's going to use 70% of that. So I'm not sure if the default is for Photoshop to always use 70% of the total RAM, but anyway, I can use this slider if I want to adjust that, right? And obviously, the more memory I commit to Photoshop, the faster Photoshop's going to run, right? Or, I could certainly drop that down if I want to commit less system resources to Photoshop. I'm going to leave the default here, though, which is the 70% there. You can certainly adjust yours if you want. The other thing that I want to mention is in the previous exercise, or maybe it was a few exercises back, I mentioned history, and I called history the Uber undo. Well, what I can do here is I can set the number of history states. Now, I'm assuming that you're not familiar with history, so what we can do here essentially is we can think of this as the number of undos. So the default is 20. I could bring that up to 25 if I want, I suppose, or I could drop that down to maybe 10 or 15, something like this. And that's the number of undos, or the number of states that Photoshop is going to allow me to back up. So anyway, I'm going to leave the default here, but you can certainly adjust that once again, as always. And then below that, we have scratch disks. Now, if I had any external hard drives, I do have some external hard drives, but they're not hooked up to my machine right now. I could set those as scratch disks. Now, what that means is once Photoshop blows through the available RAM, it's going to start using hard drive space as memory. So it's going to start by using my Macintosh hard drive, and then it would start using any external drives that I have. So let's say I'm working on a huge file, maybe 150 meg or a 250 meg file. Well, that's going to require a lot of memory to get through, right? So what I could do is I could come in here and set up some additional scratch disks. So hopefully all good. Now, I'm going to leave the preferences here. I'm going to leave it at this point, and we'll continue on with our walk through the different preferences in the next lesson.